The cold, polished floors of the Stone Ridge packhouse echoed under the rhythmic clatter of Lila Dalton's soft shoes. She moved quietly, unseen, her Omega-issued uniform blending into the shadows just as it always did. She was invisible, always the background, always unnoticed, until the Lycan King arrived. When the massive oak doors of the grand hall swung open, Lila's breath hitched. He was here. King Adrian Wolfe, a living legend, his presence felt in the very air. The pack hushed, waiting for his every move. But what no one saw coming was the way his piercing gaze, black as night, locked on hers. His eyes, raw, possessive, and terrifying, met hers for one frozen moment. The world seemed to slow, and Lila's heart began to race. She was nobody, just a housekeeper. But in that instant, she felt the bond form between them. Fate had chosen her, not Maya, not the beautiful, ambitious beta she had always served. No, it was Lila, unseen, unnoticed, who had been claimed. Lila Dalton had spent 22 years hiding in the shadows, the invisible Omega of the Stone Ridge packhouse. Her life revolved around one person, Maya Brooks. Maya, with her perfectly curated Instagram feed, her ambitions to be the Lycan King's Luna, and her unshakable confidence was everything Lila was not. Maya had always been the pack's star, and Lila, she was the support, the housekeeper, the friend in the background. Today, that all changed. Maya was already dressed to perfection, chatting animatedly about her upcoming meeting with King Adrian. She was the pack's golden girl, the future Luna, according to every plan they had ever made. But Maya wasn't the one who had caught the king's eye. Not this time. What happens when the invisible Omega is suddenly thrust into the center of a world built on power, ambition, and betrayal? It's not just a bond, it's a claim, and no one, not even Maya, can stop it now. As King Adrian walked into the hall, Lila's thoughts raced. She was invisible. She was nothing. But in the moment their eyes met, everything changed. She couldn't explain it. She didn't need to. She had been marked, not by choice, but by fate. And as the Lycan King's growl echoed in the hall, Lila's world tilted, and she knew her life was about to unravel in ways she never imagined. If you believe everyone deserves a chance at true power, just like Lila, hit subscribe. Don't let the manipulators like Maya win. Only those who fight for fairness should be a part of this journey. The sound was not just a growl, it was a command, a deep, visceral rumble that shook her to her core. It was a mark of something primal, something deep within her that had been awakened with a force that took her breath away. Lila stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest, her body refusing to move. The other pack members were still and silent, eyes wide as King Adrian's gaze locked onto hers. It was as if the world had stopped turning and all that existed were the two of them. His dark, powerful eyes and her small, trembling figure. King Adrian took a step forward and the crowd parted for him, as if they were all too afraid to be in his path. His movements were fluid, confident. He did not walk, he stalked like a predator on the hunt. And Lila, standing there in her humble uniform, could feel the weight of his presence pulling her toward him. Maya, who had been standing near the front with the alpha, was suddenly still. The pride in her posture faltered, replaced by something darker. Her gaze darted from Lila to the king and back again, her lips tightening as she realized what had just happened. The atmosphere in the hall thickened with tension, and Lila felt the oppressive weight of Maya's fury even from where she stood. The growl came again, this time not just a warning, but an assertion of ownership. Mine. Lila gasped, her breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind as if he had spoken them directly to her, as if the universe had just shifted and drawn a new line, one she was bound to follow. She wasn't sure whether it was the power in his voice or the overwhelming pull she felt in her chest. But something in her knew this wasn't just a claim, this was destiny. King Adrian's gaze softened for a moment, studying her. There was no warmth in his eyes, no affection, only the cold, calculating look of a king who had found what he was seeking. Lila wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. Her body felt foreign to her, as if the room had become too small, the walls closing in around her. Maya's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and filled with disbelief. No. Her voice wavered, but there was no mistaking the venom behind it. She moved forward, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, her perfect figure cutting through the crowd. Maya, wait! Lila tried to call out, but her voice came out in a strangled whisper. She couldn't move, couldn't stop the scene unfolding before her. Her friend, her best friend, was moving toward the king, her expression one of determination. It wasn't just the sting of the rejection that was causing her to act. It was something deeper, something primal in her that fought for control, that refused to lose to the Omega who had always been beneath her. Maya's voice rang out, louder now, almost desperate. You can't be serious, she snapped, her gaze flicking from King Adrian to Lila, then back to him. I'm the one he's supposed to choose, not her. King Adrian didn't respond to Maya's outburst. He didn't need to. His eyes were still on Lila, the intensity unwavering. Lila felt the weight of his gaze pressing into her, and for a moment it felt like he could see every part of her. Every doubt, every insecurity that had kept her hidden all these years. Maya wasn't finished, though. I'm the one he needs, the one who's strong enough to stand beside him. She's nothing. She's an Omega. Her voice trembled now, but there was no mistaking the bitterness that coated her words. You're making a mistake, Your Majesty. She's just a servant. Lila winced, her chest tightening. The words cut deep, deeper than she expected. Maya was her best friend. She had always been there, always supported her. But now, Maya's anger was being aimed squarely at her. And in that moment, Lila realized that no matter what happened between her and the king, things could never go back to the way they were. King Adrian's gaze finally flicked to Maya, his eyes narrowing. Enough. His voice was low, a barely contained growl that caused the entire pack to flinch. Maya froze in place, her eyes wide as she realized the gravity of what had just happened. But the king wasn't finished with her. He turned back to Lila, his expression softening just slightly. Without another word, he took a step forward, and before Lila could react, he extended his hand toward her. Come, he said, his voice like velvet. The command was clear, but there was no cruelty in it, only a raw, magnetic pull that Lila couldn't ignore. His touch would mean everything. The moment she took his hand, her life would change forever. Lila's mind raced. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to avoid this fate that she hadn't asked for. But at the same time, a strange peace settled over her, as if everything in the world had suddenly fallen into place. She took a deep breath and reached out, her trembling fingers brushing his. The moment their skin met, it was like an electric shock, a jolt of pure, uncontrollable power that surged through her. Her vision blurred for a moment, the room spinning around her. She felt herself being pulled forward, the bond between them becoming tangible, real. The power coursing through her was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It wasn't just physical, it was a connection that reached deep into her very soul, awakening something that had lain dormant for years. Mine, King Adrian repeated, his voice soft but firm, as if marking her all over again. And then, the world tilted. The snap of a phone camera broke the silence that had settled over the hall. A flash of light. Lila's head snapped around and she saw the phone screen light up, her image frozen on the screen. The cameras were rolling, the pack was watching, and Maya, her best friend, stood there, frozen in shock and fury as the moment was immortalized for all to see. Lila's body hummed with energy, the power from the bond still flooding her senses. But even in the midst of this overwhelming moment, she could feel the sting of the betrayal. Maya's eyes, betrayal and rage, met hers from across the hall. The friendship that had once felt unbreakable now seemed so fragile. Before Lila could process what was happening, Maya's voice cracked, her anger bubbling over. You think this changes anything? Maya screamed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the thick tension in the room. You think you can just take him from me? You're nothing. A housekeeper, a servant. He's made a mistake. He'll regret it. You'll see. You'll both see. The slap came before anyone could react. Maya's hand struck Lila's cheek with a sound that echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. The force of it sent Lila stumbling back, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the sting of the slap burn across her skin, the warmth of blood pooling on her lips. The pack gasped, phones snapping photos, recording the moment that would surely go viral. Maya's face twisted with anger, her breath coming in short gasps as she stood in the middle of the room, seething. Lila pressed her hand to her cheek, staring at the blood that now stained her fingers. For a moment, all she could do was blink in shock. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Maya's rage to manifest in such a public, brutal way. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, the king moved. King Adrian's fury erupted. In a blur of motion, the king stepped in front of Lila, his towering figure blocking her from view. His eyes were no longer just cold, they were filled with an unimaginable fury, a fury that seemed to vibrate through the very air. His voice was low, filled with a promise of danger. You dared? Lila could feel the ground tremble beneath her as the pack held its breath. King Adrian's fury had only just begun. If you believe everyone deserves respect and equality, comment, I choose fairness. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The sting of Maya's slap still burned on her cheek, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing in King Adrian's eyes. His fury had shattered the moment of calm, transforming the once serene hall into a battleground of power, pride, and dominance. For a heartbeat, Lila felt herself caught in the intense pull of his gaze. His eyes, dark as midnight, locked onto hers with an intensity that left no room for escape. The bond between them, still new and raw, pulsed through her, its heat like wildfire, too powerful to ignore. She was bound to him now, not by choice, but by fate. The room was deathly silent. Every single member of the pack, from the warriors to the elders, stood frozen, their eyes wide, their phones now forgotten in their hands. No one dared to move or speak. Lila could hear the blood rushing in her ears as she waited for what would come next. What would happen now? Could she really be his? The Lycan King's mate? The thought was surreal. She had spent her life blending into the background, an invisible figure in the pack's intricate web of power and politics. Now, she was at the center of it all, whether she wanted to be or not. King Adrian stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow her whole. Without a word, he reached out and took her hand in his. His grip was like iron, strong, unyielding, and the moment his fingers brushed against hers, something inside Lila shifted. The power of the bond surged through her, a flood of energy that made her knees weaken, her breath catch in her throat. "Mine," he murmured again, his voice low, commanding. It was not a question, but a declaration. He was staking his claim, marking her as his own in a way that went beyond words. Lila's world tilted on its axis, and she had to fight to stay upright. She wasn't sure if it was the rush of power that overwhelmed her senses or the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that her life would never be the same again. There was no going back. She had been chosen, she had been claimed. But in the back of her mind, a sharp pang of guilt twisted through her. Maya, her best friend. She had always been there for Lila, had always supported her, until now. Maya had always dreamed of being the Luna, of standing by the Lycan King's side. And now Lila was in her place. "Maya," Lila whispered, her voice trembling as she turned to face her friend. Maya stood several feet away, her face contorted with rage and humiliation. Her eyes were blazing with fury, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The venom in her gaze was unmistakable. She had never looked at Lila like this before, not in all their years of friendship. Lila wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, to ease the tension, but she couldn't. Maya was too far gone. There was nothing she could do to fix this. Maya's voice broke the silence, shrill and desperate. "You're not worthy of him," she spat. "You're nothing, just an omega. What could you possibly offer him?" Lila flinched at the words, the cruelty in them cutting deeper than she expected, but she had no time to dwell on the pain. King Adrian's grip tightened on her hand, his voice a low growl of warning as he turned to face Maya. "You will respect her," he said, his tone dark and cold. "She is mine, and anyone who dares challenge that will answer to me." The room seemed to contract as the king's words echoed through the hall. A powerful, magnetic force emanated from him, filling the space with an oppressive weight. Lila could feel it, could feel the very air trembling with his authority. No one dared move, no one dared speak. Maya, for all her defiance, took a hesitant step back, her eyes widening in shock as the king's presence crushed her. King Adrian turned back to Lila, his expression softening just slightly, though his gaze still held the same intensity. "Come," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're with me now. We have much to discuss." Lila's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her feet moved, following the steady pull of the bond that still vibrated through her veins. Every step she took felt like it was pulling her deeper into a world she didn't know, a world where she had never belonged. The king led her forward, not as a servant, not as an omega, but as his chosen mate. As they reached the grand staircase, Lila dared a glance back at Maya. Her friend was still standing there, frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. There was a look in her eyes, something raw and unrecognizable. For the first time in years, Lila saw a flicker of something else there. Fear. Fear of losing everything. But Lila had lost everything already. She had lost her place in Maya's world. She had lost her quiet, invisible life. The moment King Adrian had marked her, her life had irrevocably changed, and now there was no going back. The king led her into a private study, the doors closing with a heavy thud behind them. The room was dimly lit, the rich scent of leather and mahogany filling the air. King Adrian moved to the large desk at the center of the room, his hands resting on the surface as he turned to face her. Lila stood frozen by the door, unsure of what to do or say. Her body hummed with the energy of the bond, but her mind was racing, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of everything that had just happened. She was his, but what did that mean for her? You don't have to say anything, Adrian said, his voice unexpectedly soft as he studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. I know this is a lot to process, it's a lot for me as well. He paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. But what you need to understand is that this bond, this claim, goes far beyond any ceremony. It is a part of us, of who we are. And it is not something to be taken lightly. Lila's throat tightened, but she managed to speak. Why me? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Why did you choose me? King Adrian's expression softened, and for the first time, Lila saw something more than the cold, unyielding king in his eyes. There was something vulnerable there, something that made her heart ache. I didn't choose you, he said quietly. I never had a choice in the matter. We were always meant to be, whether I wanted it or not. Lila swallowed hard, her head spinning as his words sank in. She wasn't sure what to feel, relief, confusion, fear. The bond between them was undeniable, but it was also terrifying. And as she looked up at him, at the king who had marked her, she realized that her life was no longer her own. The path ahead would be filled with danger, uncertainty, and challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was clear, she had been claimed, and now there was no going back. The weight of King Adrian's words settled over Lila like a heavy cloak, suffocating and inescapable. We were always meant to be, whether I wanted it or not. Those words echoed in her mind, filling her with a mixture of awe and fear. It wasn't just that she had been chosen, it was that she had always been chosen from the very beginning. And now her life as she knew it was over. She was no longer Lila Dalton, the invisible Omega housekeeper. She was Lila Dalton, the Lycan King's mate. And that meant her world was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to fathom. But just as the reality of it all began to sink in, King Adrian's words morphed into a new, unsettling truth. The bond is not just a claim, it is a responsibility. Lila stared at him, feeling the heat of the bond thrumming between them, pulling her closer to him. But there was no comfort in his gaze, no reassurance. There was only a cold determination. He took a step toward her, his dark eyes never leaving hers. The council won't accept you, not yet. They'll demand you prove yourself worthy of being Luna. This bond, this claim, it means nothing to them unless you prove you're fit to rule. Lila swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. I don't know how to rule. I've never even been seen by anyone. How can I... She stopped herself, the weight of the words pressing down on her. How could she possibly stand alongside a king, lead a pack, make decisions that affected the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands? She was just an Omega, nothing more, nothing less. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't prepared. King Adrian reached out, placing his hand gently on her shoulder, his touch both grounding and heavy. You don't have a choice in this, he said softly. But you will learn. I'll teach you. His voice was steady, but there was a note of something else in it, a promise or perhaps a warning. Lila wasn't sure which. All she knew was that she had been thrust into a world that was as unfamiliar as it was dangerous. He turned away from her, walking toward the large windows that overlooked the sprawling territory of the Stone Ridge Pack. The moonlight bathed him in an ethereal glow, casting long shadows across the room. Lila followed him with her eyes, unable to tear herself away from the sight of him. She had always known of the king, everyone had, but standing this close to him, seeing the power that radiated off of him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and something else. Fear. The council will call for your first trial soon, King Adrian continued, his voice distant as he gazed out the window. They'll test your leadership. They'll test your ability to rule. Lila's chest tightened, her heart racing again. What kind of tests? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was afraid to hear the answer. Competency, he said, his tone flat. They'll want to see if you can handle the political games, the diplomacy, the responsibility. You won't be able to hide in the shadows anymore. This is your chance to prove that you can lead. Lila felt her breath hitch in her chest. Led? The thought was almost laughable. She wasn't qualified to lead anyone, let alone a pack of powerful Lycans. She had always been the one who cleaned, who served, who blended into the background. Now she was expected to step into the role of Luna, to stand beside King Adrian as his equal. It felt like too much, too fast. But the bond thrummed between them, pulling her forward, reminding her that she had no choice in the matter. She had been chosen, and now she would have to prove herself. The days that followed were a blur. Lila barely had time to process her new reality before the council's summons arrived. King Adrian had prepared her as best he could, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the trial she would face. The council members, Alpha Thorn, Alpha Era, and Alpha Xavier, were cold, calculating, and unforgiving. Their eyes were sharp, their words sharp enough to draw blood. Lila stood before them, her hands trembling at her sides, her stomach twisting in knots. Maya wasn't there, but Lila could feel her presence like a shadow in the room, lurking just beyond the surface, ready to strike. "You are here today to prove your worth, Luna Lila," Alpha Thorn said, his voice grating as he spoke her title for the first time. It felt foreign to her, like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. "The first trial is one of diplomacy. You must show us that you can handle the intricacies of pack politics, that you can mediate between our packs and keep us united." Lila nodded, but her mind was racing. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her, and she felt like she might collapse under it. What did they expect from her? She had never been involved in the politics of the pack before. She didn't know the first thing about diplomacy. How was she supposed to mediate between rival factions when she could barely speak to them without shaking? King Adrian stood behind her, a silent presence, his support undeniable, but it was clear that he would not intervene unless absolutely necessary. This was her trial, her test. "Your first task," Alpha Aura continued, "is to resolve a long-standing dispute between two of our packs, Red Fang and Silver Creek. They have been at odds over hunting grounds and territory for years. They cannot continue to fight over these resources without causing a rift in the entire alliance." Lila felt a knot form in her stomach. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Find a solution," Alpha Xavier said with a smirk. "Negotiate. Convince them to share resources, find common ground, and bring peace. If you can't, we'll know that you're not fit to lead." Lila took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging in her chest. She had no idea how she was supposed to do this. She had never been trained in diplomacy. She had never been trained to be Luna. She was just an Omega, a housekeeper, and now she was expected to fix a problem that had festered for years, to heal a rift that had torn packs apart. But as she looked over at King Adrian, standing silently by her side, she felt something stir within her. The bond between them hummed with power, filling her with an unexpected surge of confidence. This wasn't just about her. This was about the pack, about the future they could build together. And if she was going to do this, she had to believe in herself. Had to find the strength inside her that had been dormant for so long. Lila raised her chin, meeting the eyes of the council. "I'll resolve it," she said, her voice steady, more confident than she felt. "But I'll need to speak with both packs first. I can't do this alone." The council exchanged looks, their skepticism evident, but they said nothing. Alpha Thorn simply nodded, and Lila turned to leave the room, her mind already racing with possible solutions. She didn't know if she could do it, but for the first time she realized that she might just have a chance. Lila could feel the weight of the council's scrutiny on her back as she left the chamber, her mind buzzing with uncertainty. The pressure was suffocating. Every step she took, every breath she drew, felt like it carried the weight of the entire pack's expectations. She was no longer just Lila Dalton, an unnoticed Omega housekeeper. Now she was Luna, the Lycan King's mate. And somehow, that meant she had to solve an ancient feud between two packs. How am I supposed to do this, Lila thought as she walked down the cold stone corridors of the pack house, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps approaching from behind. Lila didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel the presence, the quiet tension in the air. Maya. Maya's voice reached her before she even saw her. "You think you can fix this? You think you're fit to be Luna?" The words were laced with venom, but there was something else there, something deeper. Hurt. Betrayal. Lila's heart twisted, but she held her ground. She didn't turn to face Maya immediately, not ready to see the anger in her eyes, not ready to face the friend she had always trusted, now standing as a stranger. "Maya, please, I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this," Lila said softly, her voice shaky but firm. "You know that." Maya's laughter was bitter, edged with disbelief. "You didn't want it? You didn't want to be chosen by the king? You didn't want to be his mate?" Her voice grew louder, a harsh edge creeping into her words. "I've spent my entire life preparing for this moment, for the chance to stand beside him. And now you—" Maya stopped, her breath catching as if the very thought of it was too much for her to handle. Lila finally turned to face her, the familiar weight of guilt gnawing at her insides. Maya stood there, her expression twisted in frustration and hurt, but it was the way her eyes gleamed with a sharp, predatory glint that made Lila pause. "Maya, please," Lila said again, her voice pleading. "I never meant for this to happen." But Maya wasn't listening. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as her lips curled into a cruel smile. "You don't get it, do you?" she hissed. "You think I'm angry because you're with the king? No. I'm angry because you're taking everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed. You've ruined everything, and now you're going to pay for it." Lila's stomach turned at the venom in her words. She knew Maya was angry, but this felt different. This was something deeper. Maya wasn't just jealous anymore. She was consumed. Before Lila could respond, Maya's gaze flicked to something behind her, and her smile widened. "I've done what I had to do," Maya said with a cold, calculating look. "It's done." Lila turned just in time to see a pair of warriors emerge from the shadows, their presence looming behind Maya like dark clouds. They were the Alpha's men, the ones who usually handled the pack's more delicate matters. "Maya, what have you done?" Lila's voice faltered as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. "What do you mean, it's done?" But Maya didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, a satisfied smirk playing at her lips. "You'll see. Everything's already in motion. You can't stop it now." Lila stood frozen for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest as the warriors moved closer. She didn't understand what Maya was talking about, didn't understand what had been set in motion, but the cold dread creeping up her spine told her that whatever it wasn't good. "What have you done?" Lila repeated, her voice trembling. Maya's eyes sparkled with malice. "I did what I had to do to ensure you wouldn't be able to take what's mine." Her voice lowered to a dangerous whisper. "You're going to fall, Lila, and when you do, I'll be there to pick up the pieces, but you..." Maya sneered. "You're nothing. You're not meant for this life." The warriors moved forward, and in that instant, everything clicked into place. Maya had orchestrated something that would bring her down, that would make sure the king saw Lila as unworthy. But what? Lila took a step back, trying to clear her head, trying to figure out what to do. She couldn't let them take her. Not now. Not when everything she'd fought for had only just begun to take shape. "Get away from me," Lila said, her voice low and filled with a new kind of resolve. Her body thrummed with the energy of the bond, and she could feel the power pulsing inside her, but she wasn't sure how to wield it yet. She wasn't sure if it could help her now. But the warriors didn't stop, they came closer. Their movements measured, precise. Lila glanced back down the hall. "King Adrian," she called, her voice louder now, desperate. The warriors hesitated, their eyes darting nervously at one another. But just as Lila was about to call for him again, she heard the heavy footsteps of someone approaching. The air shifted, the weight of the pack's power hanging in the balance. A familiar figure emerged from the shadows, the sound of his boots echoing in the silence. King Adrian. His eyes locked onto Lila, and then he looked at the warriors, his gaze like a thunderstorm ready to explode. "Step away from her," King Adrian's voice was like ice, low and dangerous. "Now." The warriors hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping back, their heads bowed in submission. Maya's smug expression faltered for the first time, and the world around them seemed to breathe again. But the damage had already been done. The betrayal was set in motion. The tension in the room was suffocating as King Adrian stood between Lila and the two warriors who had once threatened to drag her away. His presence was a physical force pushing against the walls of the pack house, drowning out the fear and doubt swirling in Lila's chest. She could feel the weight of his power, the authority he wielded with a quiet grace, and it both comforted and terrified her. But now, in the aftermath of Maya's betrayal, Lila wasn't sure if comfort was what she needed. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. "Maya, what did you do?" Lila's voice was steady, but the fear behind her words couldn't be hidden. The bond between her and King Adrian thrummed beneath her skin. Yet something was wrong, something far worse than she had imagined. Maya's expression twisted, her anger and frustration transforming into a dangerous gleam in her eyes. "I did what needed to be done," she said, her voice venomous, dripping with malice. "You don't belong here, Lila. I've spent years building my place by his side, and now you come out of nowhere, a nobody, and take everything I ever wanted. I'm not going to let that happen, not while I have any power left." Lila's heart sank. Maya was no longer the best friend she had once known. This was someone else, someone driven by jealousy and rage. "Maya, please," she started, but Maya cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Please? You think after everything you've done you can just beg me to stop? You're pathetic." You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Maya's eyes flicked to King Adrian, and Lila saw a flicker of something dangerous there, a glimmer of desperation. "You've lost before you even started," Maya spat, her voice trembling with hatred. "You're nothing but a housekeeper pretending to be something more. The king may have marked you, but I know who you are, and I'll make sure he sees it too." Lila's chest tightened as Maya's words sank in. Her heart felt heavy with the betrayal, but the fear that gripped her now was something else, something more primal. Maya wasn't just angry, she was dangerous, and she had set something in motion that Lila couldn't see, something that could tear apart everything Lila had worked for. King Adrian took a step forward, his voice like a low growl shaking the room. "Enough, Maya." His voice carried a weight of finality that made everyone freeze, but Maya didn't back down. "She's nothing, Your Majesty." Maya's voice cracked as she stepped toward him, her eyes wild with a mix of anger and desperation. "She doesn't belong here. She can't rule. She doesn't have the blood for it." Lila's eyes widened in realization. "Maya, what are you talking about?" But Maya wasn't done. Her laughter was bitter, mocking. "The bloodline, Lila, the bloodline you have. You don't think I knew what your mother was? You don't think I knew what you really are? You can't hide forever." The words hit Lila like a punch to the gut, her mother. She had always known there was something strange about her bloodline, something she had never understood. Her mother had kept secrets, had been distant and cryptic about their family's past. But Lila had never imagined it would lead to this, had never imagined that Maya, of all people, would know the truth before she did. "What do you mean?" Lila's voice was barely a whisper, her throat constricted with the weight of the truth she didn't understand. Maya smiled cruelly, her eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. "I know you're not just an Omega. Your bloodline runs deeper than that. You're more than you think, Lila, more than anyone knows, but I'm going to make sure that secret stays buried, forever." Lila's mind raced. She could feel the pulse of the bond between her and Adrian, but it didn't ease the confusion or the dread that was growing within her. What had Maya uncovered? What truth had she exposed? Before she could process her thoughts further, Maya turned sharply on her heel and gestured to the warriors at her side. "You think he'll protect you? He doesn't even know who you really are." Her voice was bitter, filled with resentment. "He doesn't know the monster hiding behind that pretty little face." King Adrian's eyes narrowed as he turned to Lila. "What is she talking about, Lila?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, a sharpness that sent a chill down Lila's spine. Lila didn't know what to say. She hadn't known the truth herself, had never been told about her bloodline, her heritage. Her mother had never spoken of it, and Lila had never asked. She'd always felt like an outsider, an Omega who wasn't quite good enough, but now everything was crumbling around her. "I don't know," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I don't know what she means. Adrian, my mother never told me anything about my bloodline." There was silence in the room as the weight of her words hung in the air. King Adrian didn't speak for a moment, but when he did, his voice was low and dangerous. "I will get to the bottom of this, Lila, but you need to understand something, no matter what this is, no matter what secrets Maya thinks she's uncovered." He stepped toward her, his gaze softening. "You are mine, and I will protect you. Always." Lila swallowed hard, her heart beating faster. The bond between them thrummed louder, the pull between them undeniable. But Maya's words, Maya's betrayal, were still ringing in her ears. What had she uncovered? What was the truth about her bloodline? The council's betrayal had already begun, but Lila knew this was just the beginning. Maya's words, her betrayal, had set the wheels in motion, and there was no going back. Lila wasn't just fighting to prove herself worthy of the title of Luna. She was now fighting for her very survival and for the truth that might tear apart everything she thought she knew. As the silence hung between them, Lila could feel a shift in the air, an impending storm. Maya had exposed a part of her past that she hadn't known existed, and now it seemed the entire pack would be watching, waiting to see if she could weather the storm. King Adrian's promise of protection was comforting, but it wasn't enough. Not when she didn't even know what she was truly up against. The heavy weight of Maya's betrayal still hung over Lila like a shadow, suffocating her thoughts and clouding her ability to think clearly. Every word Maya had spoken echoed in her mind, relentless and sharp, digging into the cracks of her self-doubt. Lila had never asked for this, never imagined her life would be thrown into chaos the moment the Lycan King's eyes landed on her. But now that she had been marked, there was no way to undo what had been done. King Adrian stood beside her, silent for a moment, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as if trying to ground her in the midst of the storm. He had promised to protect her, but even his power didn't seem enough to erase the doubts swirling in her mind. Maya had touched a nerve, and now Lila felt as though she was standing on the edge of something far deeper than she could comprehend. "We'll deal with Maya," King Adrian's voice rumbled, breaking the silence between them. His words were quiet but filled with a promise of retribution. "She has gone too far." Lila glanced up at him, her heart heavy. She had heard his words, felt the intensity of his presence, but it didn't ease the fear gnawing at her. She had spent so many years hiding in the shadows, convinced of her own unimportance, and now everything had changed. The council, Maya, her bloodline, everything was unraveling faster than she could keep up with. "Adrian," Lila whispered, her voice shaky. "What did she mean about my bloodline? What did she uncover?" He paused, his expression shifting slightly as he looked down at her. His eyes softened, but there was an edge to them, something cold and dangerous that flickered beneath the surface. "I don't know, Lila, but I will find out. I will make sure you understand everything." He gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before stepping away. Turning to face the vast expanse of the Stone Ridge territory visible through the windows. "This is just the beginning. I'm not going to let this pack tear you down, not when I've just found you." Lila's heart skipped a beat at his words. His presence was strong, unwavering, and she could feel the bond between them pulling at her, wrapping her in a warmth that made everything else seem so distant. But as comforting as it was, she couldn't ignore the pit of uncertainty in her stomach. Maya's betrayal had struck too deep, and it left her questioning everything. Could she really live up to the expectations of being Luna? Could she really fight back against those who wanted to see her fail? "What do I do now?" Lila asked softly, turning to face him. "How do I prove myself to the council?" King Adrian looked at her, his gaze steady. "You don't need to prove yourself to them, Lila. You only need to prove yourself to yourself." The next few days passed in a blur. Lila barely had time to think, let alone breathe, before the council called her to face her first real challenge. The trial that Maya had set into motion was upon her, and she knew that this was the moment that would define everything. The council had summoned her to meet them in the grand hall once again, their eyes sharp and judging. The weight of their stares felt like 1,000 tons, and as she entered the room, she couldn't help but feel small. But King Adrian was there, standing beside her like a pillar of strength, his presence unwavering. "Luna Lila," Alpha Thorn said, his voice cold and dismissive. "We are here to see if you can live up to the title. Can you truly lead this pack? Can you make decisions that will benefit all of us?" Lila stood straighter, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The bond between her and Adrian thrummed beneath her skin, steadying her. "I'm here to listen," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "To understand what this pack needs, to make decisions based on what's best for everyone. Not just me, but for all of us." Alpha Ara's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a tight smile. "We'll see about that." The trial was a political one, diplomacy between the packs. Lila had to mediate a long-standing trade dispute between the Stone Ridge pack and the neighboring Red Fang pack. The two packs had been at odds over shared territory, and the tension had only worsened in recent months. It was up to Lila to bring them together, to negotiate a solution that would benefit both packs. The council members watched her closely, their eyes assessing every word she spoke, every movement she made. King Adrian stood behind her, silent but present, his support as much a weight as a shield. Lila took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had no experience in politics, no experience in diplomacy. All she had were her instincts and the strength of the bond between her and Adrian. "The trade routes are vital to both packs," she said, addressing the representatives from Red Fang. "But I understand the concerns over territory. We need to find a way to ensure that both packs can benefit without conflict. If we continue down this path of division, we risk more than just a trade war. We risk a rift that could tear us apart permanently." The representatives from Red Fang exchanged wary glances, clearly not used to being spoken to so directly, but Lila wasn't finished. She turned to the Stone Ridge representatives. "We have resources that can be shared. The land in question can sustain both packs if we agree to compromise, but that compromise has to be built on trust, not power." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment there was silence. King Adrian stepped forward then, his voice low and commanding. "She's right. We must work together, not against each other. No one wins when we fight like this. We all lose." There was a long pause before the Red Fang representative, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jace, spoke up. I agree, he said grudgingly. Perhaps there's room for negotiation. Lila exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Slowly, the two packs began to discuss terms, tentative, but progress was made. In the end, they agreed on a new trade agreement, one that benefited both sides and promised to bring peace to the area. As the meeting concluded, the council members were quiet, their faces unreadable. Lila stood there, heart racing, as the weight of the trial began to sink in. She had done it. She had resolved a conflict that had lasted for years. She had earned something more than the title of Luna. King Adrian placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and proud. You've proven yourself, he said softly. You're ready. The pack is ready to follow you. Lila looked up at him, her chest swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. Maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Maybe she could be the Luna this pack needed. But as Lila stood there, the weight of the council's approval heavy on her shoulders, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Maya's betrayal had only scratched the surface, and Lila knew that the secrets of her bloodline, whatever they were, would soon come to light. The days following Lila's first trial were a blur of meetings, discussions, and decisions. She had proven herself to the council, but the weight of what lay ahead continued to bear down on her. Her victory in resolving the trade dispute between the packs was no small feat, but it felt like a temporary reprieve, a moment of peace before the storm. The whispers in the pack house hadn't stopped, though. Lila could feel them, could hear the soft murmurs whenever she walked through the halls. There were those who supported her, those who had always believed in the possibility of a female Luna, even if they had never said it aloud. But there were also those who still saw her as an outsider, an Omega who had been thrust into a position she wasn't ready for. Maya's words still haunted her, and the realization that her bloodline, whatever it was, might be the key to everything, gnawed at her constantly. But amidst all the turmoil, there was one thing that remained constant: King Adrian's unwavering presence at her side. He was more than a protector, he was her partner in this, even if the weight of it all seemed too much for her to bear. I didn't want this, Lila said quietly one evening, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. I didn't ask for this life, Adrian. I never imagined I'd be here, leading a pack, trying to prove myself to the council, to everyone. Adrian stood beside her, looking out at the horizon. His sharp features softened slightly as he turned to face her, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, he said gently. I know this wasn't what you expected, but you've done more than prove yourself. You've shown the pack your strength, your resolve. That's what matters. Lila shook her head, frustration building within her. Strength? I'm not strong. I'm just trying to survive. I'm trying to navigate a world that's so far beyond me. He took a step closer to her, his presence comforting despite the storm brewing within her. You don't have to be perfect, Lila. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to lead with your heart. Lila met his gaze, his words resonating deep within her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. She wasn't alone, and perhaps that was enough. But the relief was short-lived. Lila's thoughts returned to Maya, the betrayal, the cruel words. She could still see the sharpness in Maya's eyes, the venom in her voice as she had condemned Lila to a future she had never asked for. Lila could feel the anger, the resentment still simmering just beneath the surface, and it scared her more than she cared to admit. I don't know what to do about Maya, Lila admitted, her voice filled with a deep sorrow. I don't know how to fix this. Adrian's expression hardened, his jaw clenching briefly. You don't have to fix it, Lila. Maya has made her choices. What she did to you, to us, is unforgivable. But you don't have to carry the weight of her betrayal on your shoulders. That's not your burden. Lila turned away from him, her eyes gazing into the distance. She could still hear Maya's voice in her head, could still feel the sting of her rejection, the bitterness that had once been their friendship. But Adrian was right, she couldn't carry the weight of Maya's betrayal forever. She had to let go. I can't just let her go, Adrian, Lila said softly. She was my friend. I can't just pretend it didn't happen. Adrian stepped forward, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of quiet support. You don't have to forget, but you do need to move on, and that starts with showing mercy, Lila, not just to Maya, but to yourself. It wasn't long before Lila was forced to confront the consequences of Maya's betrayal once more. The whispers in the pack house had turned to rumors, and the rumors to accusations. Maya's followers, those who had once idolized her, had begun to spread the word. They claimed Lila wasn't fit to lead, that she was nothing more than an outsider who had somehow manipulated her way into the king's favor. The pack was divided, and the council was growing impatient. They needed to see results, needed to see that Lila could handle the pressures of being Luna. But it wasn't just the council that she had to worry about now, it was the pack, the very people she had sworn to protect. Maya's influence had reached far beyond the walls of the pack house, and now Lila had to face the truth. Maya wasn't just a threat to her position, she was a threat to the entire pack. Maya has to be dealt with, Alpha Xavier said during one of the council meetings, his voice hard and unforgiving. She's a threat to our unity. Her lies are poisoning the pack. We can't let her continue to undermine Lila's authority. Lila felt the weight of their stares on her, their judgment heavy in the air. King Adrian was silent beside her, but she could feel his gaze on her, waiting for her decision. The decision would be hers, and it would shape everything to come. But even as she stared at Maya's supporters across the room, a part of her hesitated. I don't want to exile her, Lila said quietly. I don't want to destroy her. She's still my friend, in a way. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Alpha Xavier's eyes narrowed, his expression stern. Mercy isn't always the right choice, Lila. Sometimes we have to make the hard decisions for the good of the pack. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. Mercy. The word had a heavy weight. But she couldn't bring herself to make the decision out of anger, out of a desire for retribution. Maya had betrayed her, but she couldn't let her resentment cloud her judgment. I won't exile her, Lila said firmly, her voice steady as she met the eyes of the council. But she will face consequences for what she's done. She will be stripped of her influence, her privileges. She will serve the pack, work to rebuild the trust she's broken. But she will not be banished. The decision wasn't an easy one, but it was the right one. Maya had broken her trust, and Lila couldn't simply let her off the hook. But she would not lower herself to the same level of cruelty. Maya had to face the consequences of her actions, but it was Lila's strength, not vengeance, that would guide her through this. As the council members reluctantly nodded in agreement, Lila felt the burden of her decision settle on her shoulders. It wasn't easy, but she had done it. She had made a choice that was true to herself. But as the council session ended and the pack began to disperse, Lila's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. Maya's redemption was only part of the journey. Lila's path to becoming the Luna of the Stone Ridge pack was just beginning, and the challenges she faced were far from over. The whispers would only grow louder, the stakes higher, and she still had to confront the truth about her bloodline, what Maya had uncovered. The questions were multiplying, and Lila knew she had no choice but to face them head on. The next few days felt like an eternity for Lila. The pack had been in disarray ever since Maya's betrayal, and now, with Lila's decision to strip Maya of her influence, the tension was at an all-time high. Whispers filled the halls, and the air in the pack house seemed thick with uncertainty. But Lila refused to back down. She couldn't. Too much was at stake now, her own future, the future of the pack, and the bond she had with King Adrian. She had made a choice, but the consequences of that choice were still unfolding, and there were those in the pack who didn't understand. Those who believed Lila wasn't fit to be Luna. That she was nothing more than an Omega who had stumbled into power by sheer accident. And then there was Maya. Lila was sitting in her study, papers scattered across the desk in front of her, when the knock came. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was before she even stood up. King Adrian. He entered without waiting for permission, his tall form casting a long shadow across the room. There was something in his expression, something hard, something grim, that made Lila's stomach tighten with anxiety. What's happened? She asked, trying to steady her voice. Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room and closed the door behind him. The weight of his silence filled the space between them, making Lila's pulse race. There's a challenge, he said at last, his voice low. Maya has rallied her supporters. They've formed a faction, and they're demanding a duel for your position as Luna. Lila's breath caught in her throat. A duel? Her voice shook, disbelief written across her face. Why didn't you stop them? Adrian's eyes darkened. I tried, but the council is backing them. They want to see if you're worthy to lead. They want blood. His fists clenched at his sides, his frustration palpable. They want to test your strength, Lila. They think you won't be able to handle it. Lila's mind raced. A duel to the death? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not to the death, Adrian replied, his gaze steady. But it will be brutal. You'll have to fight to prove you deserve your place beside me. This is their way of deciding if you're truly fit to be Luna. Lila felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything she had worked for, the trials, the decisions, the political games, had led to this moment. It was no longer just about winning the council's approval or proving herself as a leader. It was about survival. It was about defending the only future she had left, the one she had never asked for but had somehow come to desire. Adrian reached for her, his strong hand gently taking hers. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm with you. We've faced worse and we'll face this together. But you have to decide. This challenge will decide everything. Do you want to fight for your place, for our future?" Lila's heart raced as she stared at their hands, her fingers intertwined with his. She could feel the power of the bond pulsing between them, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to face the future. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what was hers. Her eyes met Adrian's, and in that moment, she knew what she had to do. "I'll fight," she said, her voice steady, resolute. "I'll fight for everything." The day of the duel arrived quickly. Lila stood in the center of the arena, the sun shining down on her, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The pack had gathered, their eyes fixed on her, watching her every move. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the judgment in their eyes. But she refused to let it break her. Adrian stood at the edge of the arena, his gaze never leaving her. His support was unwavering, but she knew this was her battle to fight. This was her moment to prove that she was more than just an Omega. She was Luna. Across the arena, Maya stood, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and determination. She had always been confident, always believed she was the one destined to be by Adrian's side. But now, she was nothing more than a challenger, a threat to Lila's future. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Lila," Maya called out, her voice laced with venom. "This is where you belong, not here, not leading. You'll never be good enough." Lila's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let Maya's words get to her. "I'm here because I belong here, Maya," she replied, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Maya's. "And I'm not going anywhere." The tension in the air was palpable as the duel began. The warriors circled, their eyes darting between the two women. The sound of swords being drawn cut through the silence, and the arena came to life with a burst of movement. Maya struck first, her movements swift and vicious. She was skilled. Lila couldn't deny that, but Lila had something she didn't, something more powerful than any sword or weapon. She had her bond with Adrian. She had the strength that had been awakened within her when he marked her. She had the power of their connection. Lila blocked Maya's first strike, the force of it sending a jolt up her arm. But she didn't falter. She countered, her movements fluid and precise, fueled by something deeper than just the desire to win. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for Adrian, for the pack, for the future she had come to believe in. "You're weak," Maya sneered as she swung her sword again, aiming for Lila's side. But Lila was faster this time. She sidestepped, her body moving with a grace she hadn't known she possessed, and with one swift motion she disarmed Maya, sending her sword clattering to the ground. The crowd gasped, and for a moment there was silence. Maya was on her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. She had never expected this, never expected to be bested by the Omega she had always looked down on. But before Lila could react, Maya's expression shifted, turning into something darker. "You may have won this round, Lila," she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "But this isn't over. I'll make sure of it." The words hung in the air, a warning that Lila couldn't ignore. This was only the beginning of the battle. The real war was still to come. If you believe in standing strong and fighting for what's right, just like Lila, hit subscribe. Don't let the betrayal and jealousy win. Stand with those who choose to rise above. Comment, "I fight for justice," if you believe true leaders are made through strength and mercy. The battle is far from over. Stay tuned to see what happens next.